This conversation is about how men can stand up and show up, whether it's in Jharkhand State in India, in schools around the US, our work in cities, in workplaces, in online spaces where men hang out. How can men show up in this moment? And I'm mindful of this moment when we have a head of state who is tearing down our affirmative action, DEI, funding for life-saving women's health programs around the world, Title IX, and the list could go on. The moment to stand up by and for men seems particularly crucial. Start with a short personal story of why I am trying to stand up and learning from lots of folks in the room who lead this work. I see Tony, who's led some amazing work on men standing up for violence. You will hear from Alex, if we could give a shout out to Tony and a call to men, do amazing stuff. I did not, as a 13-year-old, see on a vocational aptitude test, would you like to be a male activist for gender equality? Not a very known profession, but I did, at the age of 16, witness a school shooting, a young man with a gun, basically an honor killing. He said the other guy had stolen his girlfriend and he would make him pay, and he made us watch. A year later, in my big state university, there's a sexual assault by a group of men against a young woman. In both cases, nothing was done. Back to class, things are normal. This is what men do. I thought of my adopted siblings, foster children who came through my home, all of whom had stories of men's violence or neglect. And once you see the male face and the masculine side of violence, there's kind of no unseeing it. And there's no walking away from it if you have any kind of a conscience or a care for others in the world. And so I founded Equimundo out of that work. What can men do to promote caring and nonviolent versions of manhood? We do this work, as I mentioned before, in schools, after-school programs, with workplaces, cities, partnered in about 40 countries around the world. And I think there's a lot of idea that folks think we're just telling men to stop it. Like, this is bad, don't do it. Our language around toxic masculinity has not really brought men to our cause. Increasingly, and I think you'll hear from all the panelists here, our work is about leaning into men's humanity. And our kind of, superpower in this work is speaking to men around, if I sit with a group of perpetrators or a group of young men and say, let's talk about that harmful masculinity. There's a lot of looking at our phones and at our shoes, or they'll walk away. But if I reframe the conversation this way and say, who cares for you? And who do you care for? And I let those questions sit in the room, whether the exec at that male-dominated company or young men who are used to not even thinking about manhood, there's a different conversation. And so this work is, and I am inspired by the folks that you're going to hear from, is about bringing humanity and what we think is the importance of gender equality to men. Equimundo's slogan has often been, gender equality needs men. That's pretty obvious. But men also need gender equality. We live better. We are better humans when inspired by and empowered by and in spaces that are safe and fully support the dignity of women and girls. And I think that part we've sort of hidden from men. There are things that we have to give up, but we gain a huge amount. I say that inspired by these folks here, and let us turn to this conversation. I'm with folks who, this was really fun when you invited me to do this because we all work together. So really cool to get a chance to talk. Nisha.
Gary.
Yeah, good to see you again. You can see we've done this before, so we'll try. I'll try that again. I know that as you set off to make this film, there was another film that you were making, and this story came to you. Tell us about that journey and this father-daughter duo. How did it speak to you? How did you find them? What does it mean to you?
First of all, just hello, everyone. I mean, what an incredible space that you have created, Gwyn. Thank you so much for creating this powerful space. It's it's really moving to be here, honestly. So To Kill a Tiger, I mean, I think there are a few people in the audience that are documentary filmmakers, and we, as documentary filmmakers, we follow life. We follow things as they unfold. We follow the mystery of things that yield to us. And with this particular film, I actually was making a completely different film. I was making a film called Send Us Your Brother, which was really following the work of an organization in India that was running a gender sensitization program across the state of Jharkhand in 30 villages, working with men and boys to teach them really a new way of being male, a more sort of comparing, compassionate version of masculinity. And Ranjit, who's the father in To Kill a Tiger, was part of these gender sensitization groups. And over the course of filming, about 9 months in, this horrific thing happened to his daughter. His 13-year-old daughter, Kiran, was gang raped at a family wedding. And the community, for those of you who don't know about the film, the community wanted her to marry one of the rapists because that was the way to sort of save the family honor and save the honor of the community. But Ranjit and his very powerful wife, Jaganti, said absolutely not, and they were inspired by their daughter, who at the age of 13 understood that she had inherent human rights. And that recognition really came from her dad. It was such a key and powerful relationship, and it is how they managed to go through this very, very traumatic experience and come out the other side.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'm going to go down and we'll come back. Chessy, first I get to, before I talk about your brave work to create I Have the Right, I get to say Chessy has raised a really cool dad. And I can say that I'm a scientist, I'm a developmental psychologist, and we think of parents raising their children, but I'm also a girl dad, so a bit biased. But I do think we are raised by our daughters, Alex, and humbled by them. And if we don't acknowledge that part, we're kind of, not as smart as they taught us to be. Yes. So first off, Chessy, just thank you for raising a good dad. But I want to lean into your bravery and how you wrote your memoir out of a horrendous incident and began a process of taking on a quite powerful private school that did not want to talk about the harms that were being carried out. Tell us about that journey and how you were able to step into telling your story.
Well, the pinnacle of that story is this room right now. I feel so grateful and lucky to be in a room of people who so obviously care about the same things that we have been caring for and felt so alone in caring for about women and girls and our right to safety, respect, and dignity. So thank you, Gwen. When I was 14 years old, I was sexually assaulted at a school dance at my boarding school. And I only knew that that was sexual assault when I was talking to a detective about 5 months later after I was raped by a senior classmate. During a tradition at my boarding school, which is called St. Paul's School, where seniors would target underclassmen for sex, hooking up, whatever it may be. It was basically an institutionalized version of statutory rape. I was targeted from my first day on campus, and I had no idea that what had been done to me was rape, was sexual assault. I had no words for it. I didn't know. I'd grown up in Japan. My dad is half Japanese. I had such a wonderful, lovely upbringing, a very privileged upbringing with a great education. And I didn't know what the definition of consent meant in an interpersonal relationship. I only knew what it meant in the context of signing a waiver before you go to a trampoline park or do something dangerous. And so when I was sexually assaulted at my school, 3 days afterwards, I had a breakdown, and an advisor told me they heard the breakdown happen because it was a boarding school, I was in a dorm, and she told me, I know, and call your mom. And so I called my mom and I said what I could say at the time, which was, somebody had sex with me and I didn't want it. And she immediately made sure that I was okay, that I had a safe place to sleep for the night, and then called my guidance counselor the next day. And the guidance counselor was the one to tell her, my mom's name is Susan. She said, Susan, that sounds like rape. And following that, telling my mom and connecting with my school guidance counselor, it started a rolling ball of what you're supposed to do after, or what you're told you're supposed to do after a sexual assault. I went to the hospital. I had a rape kit done. I spoke to a detective at the Child Advocacy Center because I was 15 years old, and so I'm still a child. Reported it to the police, went through a harrowing criminal trial against my perpetrator after he fired 5 attorneys who told him to accept responsibility. But the group of boys who were targeting young women at the school would sign off every email saying, deny until you die. So we knew that it was gonna be a hard road out. What happened after my case became public in the news in 2014 was it uncovered a history of cover-ups at St. Paul's School going back until 1940 of sexual abuse by both students and teachers. And there were so many people during the publicized criminal trial that came forward to support me, who at the time I was an anonymous Jane Doe, through letters to the prosecutor's office, through phone calls and emails to the coalition group that was supporting me and my family at the time. It was overwhelming that there were so many people who had experienced the same things that I had. But of course, only 1% to 2% of perpetrators ever see a day in jail. So I was a part of that 1% to 2%. My perpetrator went to jail for, was convicted of 4 misdemeanors and 1 felony and went to jail for 6 months. And so once I started talking about what had happened to me, because I'm a rule follower, and during the 2 years that the trial was in preparation, I wasn't allowed to speak to anybody about my experience because my parents were witnesses, my sister was a witness, and I followed the rules. So once I started talking, I couldn't shut up. Being able to connect with so many people about this shared experience that is so awful and yet gives you a whole different perspective on the way that we treat each other, not just when it comes to physical violence, but when it comes to the things that we say, the words that we use. Students making rape jokes when I returned to school, it just devastated me. And I wanted to let them know how much it devastated me, but in the moments, it's hard to find the words as a 15 and then 16-year-old girl, besides just crying. And so thankfully, over the last 10 years now 12 years since my assault, my family and I started the organization I Have the Right to, and now I'm rambling, but long story short, the school that I went to, we were in a lawsuit with them. They refused to acknowledge that what had happened to me was a systemic issue at the school, and they threatened my anonymity to be able to proceed in court. And I still remember the phone call that my parents got when that filing came in. I read it in its entirety. They were using a legal precedence for a victim who was 21 years old. In that moment, I was still 17. So I laughed. I laughed at the stupidity of these attorneys who use these victim-blaming tactics to keep us quiet, and said, they don't know who I am. They think this is going to keep me quiet. We've gone through way too much to be shut down at this point. And I came forward publicly on the Today Show with Savannah Guthrie in an interview with my whole family. and came forward as the survivor in the case, and came forward with the hashtag I have the right to help other young people young and old, claim their rights to their bodily autonomy, to be able to say no and be heard.
Thank you. You're not rambling. You're using your voice, and thanks for that bravery. Yeah. Alex, I met you when a lot of this stuff was going on, and you were enjoined from speaking about a lot of it because of these. But your anguish and quiet resolve and bravery were all clear from the first time I met you through joint colleagues at Vital Voices. So I want to commend that, and wonder if you would share a bit, if you're okay with it. I've heard you talk about your own personal journey of how you reacted, and if you're okay with that, of how you stepped into raising your voice.
Well, it was quite humbling to have to learn about courage and about using your voice from an amazing 15-year-old young woman, which is what happened with me. When Chessy was assaulted, I was actually in New York. I had left graduation weekend, and I was heading off to a business trip in London. And I was packing my suitcase when the phone rang, and my wife called me and told me Chessy had been raped. And my wife tried to say, I've got this, you've got important meetings, go. So that was, maybe inflection point, number one. And it's scary now to think about how many inflection points there were where I could have made really stupid decisions. And I had not been trained for dealing with a topic like this. I did not know what to do. There was no rule book for me to sort of refer to. But I'll tell you what the first thing that I went through, and maybe I'll make this, interactive to you. So if anyone can sort of shout out what they think. What do you think was the first emotion I felt when I got that call? Anger. Rage, yes, burning rage. Shock, but it was anger, it was rage. And then what do you think was the first thing I wanted to do after hearing that call? And somebody said it already. Yes. And then how do you think I felt as a dad, as a man? Yep, I was a failure. I did not protect my daughter, which is the number one job of a man, right? What was missing from all three of those reactions?
How she was feeling.
Yes, my daughter. And every audience that I speak to, we speak to tens of thousands of children, adults, women, men, everyone gives those answers instinctively, just like all of you did. And I realized inherently I had a masculinity issue at that moment. I didn't identify it as such, but I realized there was something wrong with me that I needed to fix, and I needed to fix quickly if I was going to be helpful to, I have 3 daughters, to one of the people that I love most in the world. And I felt very deficient, when I realized, and I took that pause that said, my reaction did not include my daughter. It dealt with my images of my masculinity, right? And this thing that men have to seek revenge, that anger is the only outlet for us. So that helped shape, what I needed to do to be the best supporter on the healing journey of my daughter and then our extended family. What I did not understand was that my own ignorance was not the only issue that I had to address, that I had to deal with society's image about gender-based violence. And we lived in a dark hole literally for the next 3 to 4 years. I did not speak to another man, another dad, about sexual assault for 2.5 years. I was living alone, just, talking to my wife, my daughter, and maybe some activists that wanted to support us. I went to St. Paul's School. I was on their Asian Council, which raised a lot of money for the school. I was a financial supporter. I sent my 2 daughters to that school. And it was the only school that they applied to because I knew teachers there, I knew people there. I thought it would be a safe place. And I didn't realize I was throwing my own daughters not into the frying pan, but into the damn fire. And I expected, after Chessy had the bravery to speak up, that we would have people lined around us, surrounding us, delivering casseroles and checking in with us, and nothing. Not only was it silence, it was active, harassment. It was active turning on us. The St. Paul's parents raised $100,000 in 3 days to pay for the defense attorney for the perpetrator. So this sense of betrayal to our family was astounding. But then through our advocacy work, we learned this is what every survivor faces. And Nisha, the film was such a powerful sort of capture of what 8,000 miles away, the same issues that families faced. So, this was something then that my wife and I said, if we get through this ordeal, I told Chessy I would not leave her side until the criminal justice system was done. I did not know it was going to take 2 years. I got fired with cause from my firm that I was working for 12 years because I needed to take 2 weeks off to look after my daughter. We lived in a world where, and am I allowed to say a curse word here?
Yes.
Okay. The most common phrase that we said was, you can't make this shit up, with what we were facing. But when we learned it was a universal problem, we said we have to get to work. And that's what we do every day now.
Yeah. Thank you, Alex. Nisha, you took a leap, a journey, a quest after the film, which is once you saw that story, you also could not unsee it, and you took to the road. Tell us about the campaign that came out of it, and I'll just also say we're going to work on another campaign together. Tell me what we're going to do on that campaign. Tell us, how your activism is coming out of the film.
Yeah. So, that was just so incredible. I can't even, and I know the story. I'm just so moved. But, I became a documentary filmmaker really not to make films, but really to make change and to make impact because, as we see the power of story, the power of sharing our stories, the power of empathy is so extraordinary. And it really does lead to change on so many levels. And, we know that in order to change culture, you have to pull at so many levers. And story is such a critical piece of that because it really allows people to mobilize around it. And film, really does that so well. And so, with To Kill a Tiger, I think once we were in the editing room, we understood, as you said, that in spite of the fact that this was a story that took place in India, that it was specific to a community, it was absolutely universal. And, not just because it sort of encapsulated a broken system and a system that survivors around the world have to navigate. It's the same system. It also, it presented both kind of the problem as well as the antidote to the problem, which is a system working and men becoming part of the change, just the way Alex is standing and Ranjit was standing. And so we've launched something called Stand With Her, which is sort of a multifaceted campaign that has a number of components. There's a 1-hour version and a curriculum in order to really sort of teach consent and healthy sexuality in schools. There's a petition that's advocating for sustained and an increase of funding for GBV organizations because we all know the decimation that has happened over the last 6 months and year. 50% of GBV organizations around the world are actually going to have to shut shop globally as a result of these funding cuts. And then we're also working with the Art Center College of Design in Pasadena, California, on 3 really extraordinary initiatives, which are all about mobilizing people. It's about using art, design, brand partnerships to mobilize community and mobilize people. Because I think we know that unless we unless women's rights, I mean, the fundamental problem really is one of value, isn't it, right? It's the fact that no matter where we are, no matter how far we've come, women and girls are still not valued the same. So it's a fundamental issue of value and culture. And so it really sort of falls upon all of us to make this a pressing issue and to very deeply entrench women's rights and girls' rights and our equality in a cultural system. And art is a perfect way to do that. So it's one piece. And then we are working, Gary and I, we've been partnering now for quite some time with Equimundo, which is an extraordinary organization. And we're partnering on something called Love Like a Man. And it's a partnership with us, with Equimundo, and an advertising agency called Gut. And it's a 5-year campaign where we are essentially reframing the ideas around masculinity and what it means to be a man, to encourage men to embrace what really exists intrinsically in all of us, right? Which is care, you know? So it's a big kind of media, public service announcements, branding, curriculum. It's a big sort of social mobilization effort that we're working on.
And fits with, you know, I think if you'll allow me to add a couple of data points here, the stories we're telling are not just a handful. It is 1 in 5 women in the world who have experienced or will experience sexual violence, and 1 in 6 boys or men. This is global. The scope requires for us to think of systems and culture change. And so this is an attempt to do that. And I think you also, with starting I Have the Right To, is trying to say, you know, I think I heard 10,000 that you talked to in a year. This is not a handful. How do we go big on this? And I'm not sure in which order, but yeah, just would like to hear from Chessy and Alex around. Tell us what you're trying to do with I Have the Right, and yeah, what's working in it. You told some amazing stories of the way that it pays forward in ways that you hadn't even planned. So maybe share one of those with the audience as well.
Well, I had the incredible opportunity to travel to Australia to get to speak to a consortium of companies who wanted to hear, you know, the story and hear advice for sending their children off to boarding school or to colleges. And at the end of our conversation, it was the parents coming up to me at the end, not to talk about their children, but to talk about their own experiences with sexual violence. This is an issue that touches every corner of the world. It touches every industry, it touches every person. All of us are impacted by sexual violence, sexual harassment, sexual assault. It's an issue that doesn't exclude good people either. People doing good have done hurtful things, and we've seen that happen. And it's important for all of us to remember that in the work that we're doing, sexual violence is inextricably linked to every single thing. I went to a wonderful session on education earlier with some incredible people who are bringing education to women and girls all over the world. And it was so interesting to hear, you know, some of the goals are to get them to universities in the United States and to schools in the US to give them, you know, wonderful opportunities here. But what happens when those wonderful opportunities are rife with harm that tends to happen at an extremely scary rate? And what are we doing to protect people once they come here? So at I Have the Right To, we try to take a holistic approach to a student and their personhood. Not a lot of places like it when we come in talking about sexual assault. It's hard to get into schools to talk about the issue of sexual assault and consent. So we didn't take that as a no, we reframed the conversations, which has allowed us to start reaching kindergartners, pre-K, to talk about what their body boundaries are, that they can say no to family members, to people that they might view as authority figures, that they have the right to their body, their autonomy, and their voice. These conversations should be starting the second we know how to speak and move. We all assume the risk of becoming victimized the second we step on this earth and take our first breath. And so it's important that we start that young to talk to our children about how to use their voices, how to speak up, how to find a trusted adult. And that's what we try to do.
And I'll jump in there. Our advocacy work really started, I think, as a healing process for our family members. We lost all community, we lost all of our friends, people ghosted us, and we had to rebuild. And so our first advocacy work was just under the banner of raising awareness, so speaking to survivors, speaking to advocates, and that made us feel good, right? It was healing, at least, you know, for my wife and I. And we rebuilt our community with beautiful people, and I sort of get the same vibe from everyone in here, so I feel so damn comfortable, thank you. But then we started realizing we need to do more, because we weren't gonna change the epidemic. A lovely gentleman that we lived across the street from in Washington, D.C., he was a former ambassador to NATO. He got to know us, he fell in love with my kids, and he said, sexual violence is the scourge of our society today. And I couldn't agree more with how he put it. So we felt a little bit of responsibility to say, do our part. And so we went to an all-girls school and in Washington, D.C., and my wife was speaking, and we were talking about consent and raising awareness. And a freshman girl named Cynthia from Holden Arms, that was the name of the school, in the back raised her hands and said, are you speaking, it's great that you're here speaking to us, but are you speaking to the boys' schools? And oh my goodness, that was a wake-up call for our org. You know, all the girls started snapping fingers. I didn't know what snapping fingers meant back then. I do now. I've seen a lot of it here. But that year we talked to 800, you know, students, and we thought, okay, we're feeling good. Schools will address us. The next year we met with 2,000 students. The next year we met with 30,000 students. And this year we've met with 45,000 students already so far year to date. But more importantly, Cynthia spurred us on to get back into the laboratory and say, how do we address boys on this topic? And everyone, I work with women, and they all turn to me, and I'm like, why are you looking at me? Because I honestly was still in the rage mode. I was the dad of a survivor, and I didn't know how to process my anger. And I had to get a lot of mentorship for quite a while from some dear friends to help me. And once it clicked for me, a light bulb went off. We need to speak to young men about aspirational masculinity. Yep. This is a phrase that one of our colleagues at Vital Voices came up with, Don McPherson, who helped mentor me for dozens of hours, listening to me rage on about young men. And once I could understand the beauty inherent in all of the boys and young men and see that again, then it became crystal clear. We've deleted the term toxic masculinity from our lexicon. And we came up with an alternate term that we think more accurately describes the issue. It's socially constructed masculinity. Sorry, I was having a brain moment. Socially constructed masculinity, because our boys are being forced to breathe toxic air that's being produced through pornography, social media, peer pressure, etc. So we wanted to build an offset to that and show boys there's another line. And we also talk to boys about practice, right? They spend thousands of hours practicing academics to perform in a stressful situation, taking an exam. They practice hundreds of hours, you know, music, instruments, or sports to perform at a performance or on the sports field. Our boys don't spend any time practicing understanding who they are here in their soul, in their core, and reconnecting with that. And we have a podcast called Aspire. It was created through 2 high school interns who were sophomores at the time. And they said, let's create a podcast talking about the challenges of being boy today. We have 60 episodes. Please look it up, Aspire, by I Have the Right To. And one of my co-hosts described how easy it is for him to every day swallow a little pebble, is the way he described it. He hears an off-taste joke, he sees something wrong. Hey, swallow the pebble, don't say anything, still stay cool with your tribe, right? But think about that over time, every day you absorb pebbles. You just get full. You see something that happens in a stressful moment, you see it through your eyes, process it through your brain, you're stuck. You can't get to that core because you have so many pebbles blocking that sort of pathway. So now we work with boys to reconnect and re-identify with those cores and then practice, what do I do in these situations? So this has saved my life.
Thank you. I'm going to open up for questions in a moment. One of the things that I think is so important about this framing of aspirational is that so much of our work with men has been about calling out harmful behavior, power imbalances, patriarchy, and we need to continue doing that. But what we hear from men and what we know is we haven't called them into something better. And I think there's another piece of aspirational masculinity, which is men are harmed by these harmful ideas about manhood. And I think we need to also help men find their stake in this. I mentioned before that I'm a developmental psychologist, and think about one of the things we know that is our superpower as humans is not our big frontal cortex here, or even our ability to defend ourselves, to beat off animals that are bigger than us. It is empathy. Babies come into the world looking for and able to, at least the ones who evolved to survive, they, from the moment that we're semi-autonomous from a parent and even before, we are looking for and making contact with a human to care for us. And that human at the other end, mostly moms, but now we know what happens with dads, are biologically wired to pay attention to that small human. That connection is what gets us out of the way of the saber-toothed tiger coming to get us, or the train coming, or whatever it is, the landslide. That is who we are as humans. It is that empathy, that ability to care and be cared for that we are wired to do. We thought for a while that was only women. We now know that men's body is in contact with babies. Change hormonally, change neurologically, whether you're the biological father or not. Men are wired for this. And I think our work with boys and men, we often say we got to fix broken men, is not really about fixing broken men. It's about giving back to boys and men what is our birthright as caring humans. And that's where we try to step into with this work. And that's a far different conversation than you're broken and I will fix you, than you came into this world to be cared for and to care. That's the arc that you inspire, and you inspire. We've got 7 minutes left, and I'm looking to our sponsors if we're allowed to open up for a few questions here. First hand I saw, yeah.
First off, I met you earlier, Chessy, and I just complimented how beautifully young your face is. When I was sitting next to you. I said,
Not me.
Hold on to those jeans. You'll be so thrilled when you get to be my age and somebody's still trying to card you. It's great. But first off, I'm so disheartened about what has happened to you. Yet at the same time, I'm extremely proud of your courage. I too went to a boarding school. I know what it means to have friends who have gone through things and say nothing. When I learned through statistical reading things that women don't report these things until they're at least 52 years old, I was just blown. Because at 50, now that I am 50, I learned that you just kind of say whatever you want anyway. So you tell it all at 50, but you hold it for so long. Anyway, my question is, I wrote a book about girls that happens to be called We Come as Girls, We Leave as Women. And had been speaking around the country and still do. It's been out for a while. And for the most part, I was speaking to girls about girls and empathy about girls, about girls, about girls. And one day, a mother who was a boy mom said, you need to talk to boys about this because they need to know about girls too. And then I thought, okay, let's give it a try. I tell you, I thought like you were saying, Alex, that you were learning to teach. Your intention was to teach. I listened. I realized that boys have so much to say if you let them talk. we don't think that they talk because they're just doing this all day or they're just shooting baskets and things. But when you give them the opportunity to share, they also have opinions, and then they begin to realize that it's okay to share. So socializing them has been such a great thing for me, and I just wanted to know how has it been for you all, speaking with boys and helping them to find their voice in all of this?
So, like I said, I didn't know what snapping was, but the first time we did a big session with 800 boys at this lovely Catholic school outside of Boston, we did a keynote that sort of set the tone and some storytelling, hopefully to let the boys understand this is a serious topic. And anytime I do a keynote, I also tell the audience first out, I'm here because I love them, and I'm here because I care about each one of them. And I want to build that connection with each single young man in the audience. When we started talking about upstander, we did a session, a workshop on upstander training, and I was a little bit nervous about how the boys would interact. And when we were putting scenarios out and the boys came up and said a good answer, these young men started fist bumping each other. That I knew what that meant. But they were encouraging each other. And at that moment I said, we need to do more of this because these young men are starving for this and they want more connectivity on this. So that's what raised us to say, all right, we're getting into schools, we can speak and we can multiply it. We need more ways to connect with them outside of the classroom. So we do social media, we do the podcast, we have internship opportunities. So we want to find opportunities to engage more, but it's been inspiring to us.
Alex, I'm not sure everybody knows what upstander training is.
So many of you have probably heard the term bystander, so someone who stands by and sees something that's happening that is not good with their gut or core, and they do nothing. And, perpetrators maybe represent 5%, 3 to 5% of the male population, right? And maybe if you believe in bell curves, 3 to 5% are really goody two-shoes, right? But then there's 80, 90% of people who have their head on a swivel, especially when they're in a school, looking to see where the power dynamics are going. And those are the boys we look to reach, because if we can teach them how to be an upstander, meaning if they see something uncomfortable that doesn't sit right with them, how can they be activated? It might not mean in the moment, taking a risk, speaking up to a senior if you're a freshman, but it could mean afterwards showing some support to the person who's been bullied, to say, I saw what happened to you and that wasn't okay, right? So we try to teach different ways that the young men can be activated and deal with issues in a way.
Question over here.
Thank you so much, everyone, for that incredibly moving discussion. I was in tears over here outside, but I'm curious, how is your messaging changing in the US right now? You mentioned already that you have moved away from toxic masculinity, but as we see now, I'm not sure how many of you saw the Manosphere documentary, but all this direction towards trad wives and really a shift that's happening almost every 3 to 4 years. It seems almost 4 years ago there was much more young men speaking up and saying not all men, and being confident and claiming to be feminist, and that was accepted and encouraged. And then now some regress where a lot of young men are actually leaning more into this other direction. So how is your messaging changing, if at all, which I think is a new kind of phenomenon that we're facing right now, not only in the US, but has global reverberations, and it's being deemed as the natural way of how things are supposed to be.
Yeah.
Just quickly, I think one of the reasons why we can connect with people is not based on what is going on in the world or what the current social trends are, but when you get down to it, I try to tell every student I speak to remember remember their selves, their inner selves. As children, we're not taught to listen to ourselves. You're taught to listen to your parents, listen to your teachers, and oftentimes that leads us astray. It leads us to not remember what things might feel dangerous, but other people are telling us to do. So I try to tell everybody to tunnel into yourself and know what your core values are. so that regardless of what's happening around you, you know where you stand, you know what you stand for, and how you will react to things when they happen. So I'd hope that despite, these trends go back and forth all the time. I've got a little sister who's 19, and I can't keep up with what's happening, and then I'm only 27. So I think it's really important to know that things will flow and ebb and change. And it's easy to lose sight of what is good about a place and a country when there's so much bad happening. But in a room like this is a room of good. This is a reminder that when you stick to your values, when you remember to support the women and children and support women's education and our right to live a safe life, that is something that obviously you all keep tight to your core. And I thank you for that, because this is what will stay the same despite what happens on the outside. And if more people start to tunnel in and stand firm in what they believe, instead of falling prey to the things that are constantly changing, trends, there's the whole body type trend, changes every couple of years. There's fashion trends, these things that we don't have control over and are often put in place when women become too powerful. The body trends tend to change when women are too powerful. They want to make us smaller. So I think it's really important to just remember who each of us are, and that's what we try to do by connecting individually with students, because there's only so much activism you can do before you realize that if you're not starting where you're standing. There were students who bullied me at school who were marching in the Women's March 2 years later. And that was the turning point in my life where I realized I can't just be speaking like this. I need to be working and practicing these same values with my sisters, with my parents, with my friends.
Nisha, quick comment, and then I'll close this out here.
Yeah. I just wanted to respond to that, and I think just specifically to toxic masculinity, and then what that does for me. I feel that one of the issues that we have, especially here in the West, I come from India originally, and I've spent a lot of time in India, and India really teaches you to look at the complexity of things and the nuance of things and the gray of things, and also to see things holistically. And I feel that that's something that we have a really difficult time with here, where multiple truths, we get so confused by them, but the reality is that multiple truths exist at the same time. And so, we talk about the manosphere. In some sense, we've created it. Yeah. We have created it, right? And I think what's really happening now also in the gender-based violence space is that we're starting to see, that we had focused correctly on women and girls. Absolutely, it's fundamental, it's so critical. But we forgot men and boys. And we cannot, we have to all, we have to walk together. Like if we're going to build the world that we want, it will take all of us. Yeah. I just have to say one last thing about another term that I really would love to do away with, and that's allyship. We don't need male allies. Yes, we need partnership, because allyship, being an ally, to me, it just reinforces. Just totally, and it reinforces this binary, and it reinforces a power dynamic, which is what we're trying to get rid of. So, yeah.
Just offer a reflection that I hope offers some optimism about this online world that we're in panic about, whether it's clavicular, the recent, adolescents on TV. We did a deep dive looking at the 6 spaces online where young men hang out the most. About 3/4 of what they follow is positive or innocuous. It's games they like to play. It's how to look good. It's what workout regime is cool. It's how to get ahead financially. The stuff is pretty innocent. It's the 30% that pulls them in. But what they're going to look for is other people like them. It's the stuff that we do as teenagers and young people. But if you sign up online as a 15-year-old male, you can do this on YouTube, within 23 minutes on average, misogynistic content will come to you. So young men are going online looking for whatever we do as teenagers and young people. It is companies making a big profit who are peddling this, because every time you click, you are their product. So I think it's important to say our sons are there waiting for us to pull them into these better aspirational versions of manhood. It's our upstanding, I like that verb, that will keep them from going down those pathways. Step into that with us. Thank you.